9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainstorm. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 14. I See the Truth. They didn't have to walk far to find the others. 5 led them to a tall, crumbling brick wall. He stopped and tapped at it with his knuckle. A large butcher knife preceded the stitch punk who held it out in front of him. As soon as 8 saw that it was only 3 rag dolls, he lowered his sword and held out his hand, beckoning for the others to follow him. They did as he led them to a small rubble-filled corner nestled between 2 large buildings. The rest of the coven was waiting there, well out of the sight of the machines. A sigh of relief reached them as 2 hobbled out of the shadows to greet his friends. The twins raced past him, their pale faces alt with smiles. They ran up to 5, 9, and 7, throwing their arms around them and embracing them tightly. They were 9 once more.
"Well done, you 3,
2 said, as he approached the young Stitchpunks.
Won't have to worry about that ghastly thing any longer."
They all smiled at once at one another, 6 handing 9 his lice staff, until one approached, looking surlier than ever.
"That may be, but we are now, once again, exposed in the open. The beast may very well have been destroyed, but who knows what other creatures the machine is creating,"
he said, brandishing his staff. 9 blinked, bending his head. One had a valid point. There could be a whole new army of machines hunting them, and they wouldn't know. They didn't even know how they were going to kill the machine beast. Perhaps hiding would be the best decision at the moment, instead of taking them head on. I looked up at the rest of the clan. "One is right. We need to find some place to hide," he said to them. 7 shot him a shocked, stony look, and he added on reassuringly, "Just until we figure out how to kill the machine beast. Then we can keep moving." This seemed to satisfy the warrior, for she nodded in reluctant agreement. One raised a brow in bafflement. He and the younger man had never agreed on anything. Brushing it aside for the moment, he followed the others as they walked out from the corner back into the city. The twins suddenly started speaking to one another, looking throughout. 9 glanced over his shoulder, catching the flashes of light out of the corner of his eye. The twins suddenly ran up to him. They both took one of his hands, tugging lightly and pointing into the emptiness. The adults all looked at them in slight confusion. "What is it?" 9 asked them gently. 3 let go of his hand and ran ahead, turning around and waving them forward frantically. 4 pointed to his brother, giving 9's hand a gentle tug once more. Glancing over his shoulder to the rest of the clan, he motioned for them to follow the twins. 1 opened his mouth to protest, but didn't say anything, as he saw the rest of the others following without question, even 8. Growling to himself, 1 followed them reluctantly. The boys continued to guide the group toward the Citadel Tower as the dawn began to creep over the distant mountains. They kept turning around, waving for the rest of the curious coven on, beckoning them to follow, scurrying in front of them quickly. It seemed they knew exactly where they were going as they walked into an intense resolve. Finally, they reached a large, crumbling building. The Stitchpunks followed 4 and 3 as they scurried across the crater-filled streets toward it. The clan followed them as they walked through what appeared to be an old, deteriorating garden. 6, who had lingered behind, looking curiously at everything, he suddenly stopped walking and bent down. He wrapped his delicate fingers around a stiff stem of what used to be a flower. He lifted it to his eyes, examining it curiously. The remnants of bright red and orange were still evident upon the delicate and withered petals. Beautiful, Six said softly to himself. Suddenly the flower was snatched away from him by a much larger hand. Six jumped with a gasp and looked up at Eight, who was glowing down at him and crushing the flower easily between his 4 strong brass fingers. He threw the crushed petals down to Six's feet.
"Move,"
he commanded in a dark voice. Six hung his head sadly and quietly, walking by, catching up with the others, not making any eye contact. The twins turned once more and pointed to the withering structure. They finally reached the place they had been searching for, and they walked up to it, smiling. Seven walked ahead over the hill to follow the twins. Her eyes lit up as soon as she saw what building it was. "You two are brilliant!" she cried out in a delight whisper, coming to the twins and proudly patting their backs. They both beamed up at her. Seven then took the lead and led them around the other side of the building. She looked warily over her shoulder, then rounded a corner. The 8 others followed her. She was standing beside an opening that seemed to have been blown in one side of the building. The twins stared in a delighted glance, flickering to one another, and then darting into the hole. Seven waved the others forward, and they entered the opening as well. 9 walked through it, straightened, and looked up. Giant stacks of torn, tattered, stained books loomed over the 9 ragdolls. Bookcases leaned against one another, limply and silently. Shattered globes stood on desks, and delicate celestial devices stood on the windowsills. Whatever was left of them, anyway. Stacks of beautiful stationery and pens lay on the ground, burned and broken. Tables lay flipped on their sides, riddled with bullet holes. It seemed that they had entered some sort of ancient bookstore. It appeared that some sort of machine in the early days of war had invaded this place and wreaked havoc upon it, and any humans that had attempted to hide within it. I looked down to see the twins happily romping around the center of the bookstore, their faces alit with recognition. "It's like they've been here before," 9 said softly, mostly to himself as he watched them. 7, however, answered. "They have, and so have I. This is the first place we lived when we left the Cartradal. We stayed for a while, but then the beast found us. We managed to lose it, and then they found the library. It was the perfect place for them. Lots of books, and they were much closer to 5 and the others," she explained to him, looking over lovingly at her little brothers. 9 nodded, still looking curiously around. The twins who had run behind the bookshelf were frantically raving and flickering to 9, telling them to come to them. He began to walk over to them. The others followed as well. As he rounded the corner, he saw that it was some sort of small clearing in the middle of the rubble. 3 approached 6. The striped Stitchpunk gasped happily as the younger Stitchpunk handed him what he carried. A small jar of ink, which was surprisingly still wet, and a blank piece of parchment, the edges slightly singed. 6 happily took these from 3 and set them on the floor. 9 watched as he sat on his knees, carefully dripping his 8 long, delicate-nibbed fingers into the jar. He shook some of the excess ink back into the bottle and turned to the paper. He set his hands down upon it and began to draw, very quickly. It looked as if he was articulating his very soul into the paper, something he'd been denied doing since the spy machine came. 9 walked over to him and kneeled beside him. While he drew, 6's entire body seemed to flow with the drawing. His arms made wide circles, fingers soaring through the paper as lines began to form a picture. "What is it?" 9 asked softly, looking closer at the picture. It was some sort of animal, snarling and evil. Towering above the animal was his sinister-looking face. A human. It seemed, across its face, from brow to the other side of its nose, was jagged dark line. Six looked up at him, brows raised. He held up one hand, his fingers wide, extending it towards 9. The younger male looked down at the hand he raised on his own, tentatively placing it on Six's. His long fingers closed around 9's hand. He then guided the face above the animal. "The dark one," Six told him softly. 9 looked at the face, then the strange animal below it. He gasped in realization and recognizing as he studied the animal. "That's the machine beast. The thing that fixed the fabrication machine," he cried. The others rushed over at this cry, gathering around and looking at Six's drawing as well. 9 pointed to the animal, which was in fact not an animal, but indeed the spine beast, inscribbled on the paper. He says that this," his copper fingers trailed on the scarred human's face, "is the Dark One."
The Dark One.
One scoffed, and 7 threw him an irritable glance. "Six, do you know anything about this?" 9 asked the banded prophet patiently. He nodded, still looking up at 9 with wide eyes. "Enemy of the source," he said softly. "Enemy of the scientist?" 9 asked. 6 nodded once more, as if patiently waiting for the others to understand it. "The enemy of the source," he repeated, softer this time. 9 shared glances with the others besides him, who were just as perplexed as he was.
"Wait, the scientist once said something about a colleague of his, if I'm recalling correctly,"
2 said, looking deeply thoughtful.
"Do you think it's the Dark One?"
5 asked him, brow pulled forward and stitching on his eye patch in worry.
"I'm not sure,"
2 replied, shaking his head.
"but it could very well be possible."
There was a sudden clicking behind them, and they turned to see the twins flashing at them, pointing frantically and excitedly. 9 got to his feet and facing them. "What is it?" he asked them. The twins then turned and grasped a newspaper, holding it to 9. He bent down to examine it, reading every other word or so. "The great scientist of our time has disappeared," the headline proclaimed. "He is presumed dead until further notice. Old famed colleague creates rival machine." Underneath it was a large picture of a grizzled old man, standing at the podium and talking triumphantly to the cheering crowd in triumph. He had his hands clasped beside his back. Across his face was a long, jagged scar. 9 touched the picture, studying it closely. This must have been the man 6 had drawn. The picture was ripped in half, but just in the corner, 9 could see a familiar horned head. 7 bent beside him, looking over the picture as well. Together, they read the quote of the Dark One.
"My colleague and I have recently broken our bonds. While he wishes to keep his machine secret, I wish to help us prosper. And so I created my own beast, capable of stealth, tracking, everything a weapon of war could be. It is also as the power source of my own design. Only I myself know its weakness. It has the ability to learn and evolve, and fix broken machines it finds on the battlefield. Together, our great country can someday take power of the world."
The twins suddenly put down the paper, and 4 gently took 9's chin between his thumbs and forefinger. Once he had his attention, he tapped the side of his optics before turning his face to a wooden back of the oak bookcase. He took a deep breath, heard only by his twins, and closed his eyes. He opened them again, looking directly at the bookcase. The two bright lights protruded from his eyes.
The fabrication machine.
A picture of the machine showed in the newsreel, while a male and female announcer made a broadcast.
The fabrication machine has been shut down until further notice. For the secretly deadly weapon that has turned against our country. It has been concealed away for its own good. The country is still in mourning of 3 soldiers killed in the process.
Reporters claim it had created a single machine of its kind before shutting it down. But no sighting has been made. The video began to flicker, and the speech became disoriented for a moment before returning to normal. A former colleague, friend has created a new machine, but it has too turned against humanity. Efforts to repel the machine has been futile, as number of losses amongst our soldiers, even our citizens, women and children, are on the rise. The most recent deaths among those found include... The light suddenly snapped back into Four's eyes. He nearly collapsed from exhaustion, startling many of the transfixed stitchpunks. 3 held his exhausted brother erect, worryingly checking over him. 9 reached over, stroking the smaller stitchpunk's hood for a moment. As he thought of the video he'd just seen, taking new information apart piece by piece and putting it back together, like a jigsaw puzzle someone had put together all wrong. The last machine, the fabrication machine Musa created, was the beast. It must have known it was going to be shut down, so it sent the beast out to find the talisman, 9 said slowly, thinking deeply.
It was around since they shut it down. Believe me, I've been fighting it ever since I woke myself.
2 said to 9, nodding. He furrowed his brows, now thinking about the Dark One.
Did the Dark One create the machine beast to rival our scientist?
5 asked, and 9 nodded slowly, staring at the ground.
He wanted to create war like the Chancellor did, but it didn't say how to destroy the power source.
9 said apprehensively, beginning to pace back and forth across the floor, thinking. If we don't know that, then we can't kill it.
How do we find out?
5 asked nervously, wringing his fingers together. 9 shook his head, still pacing. The only sound in the room were the other's hushed breathing and clicking of his feet against the floor.
I don't know. This is your plan? Just blindly rush the machines and attempt to kill them? How many of us are you willing to sacrifice now?
1 said disdainfully. 9 stopped pacing and stared at 1, fury and anger boiling inside of him at the old man. Until I breathe my last breath, nobody will be sacrificed for any reason. We need to figure out everything about before we even try to fight it, he said defiantly. 1 narrowed his eyes at 9. He was being challenged.
And if I may, why hasn't he said anything about the machine beast,
1 said, acidly gesturing towards 6. The striped stitchpunk cowered down as 1 pointed at him, clutching his key. I didn't see, never saw, couldn't see, was in world between. 6 replied softly, bending his head and quickly averting his eyes from 1. 9's brow frowned as he took a deep breath, knowing that arguing would get them nowhere. Instead of yelling back at 1, as he so wanted to do, he turned to the others. All I know at this moment is that we need to get the talisman back, 9 said to the entire group.
And how are we supposed to do that, exactly?
1 sneered. 9 was silent for a moment, and an uncomfortable silence followed.
The honor room,
6 said suddenly, breaking the eerie tension. Everybody turned to look to see that he was shivering. He sank to his knees, slowly trembling violently. His pupils shrunk, and his lips moved rapidly, forming silent words. He began to run his inked fingers through the air, his breath sharp, his chest heaved, quickly raising and falling. It looked like he was having some sort of serious emotional fit. 5 immediately ran to 6's side, kneeling beside him. He rubbed his back, whispering softly and reassuring his friend. "It's all right, 6. It's okay. I'm here. I'm right here," he said soothingly, but 6 didn't seem to notice him, or even know he was there. 9 kneeled too, confused and worried. 5 seized the bandit's ragdoll's wrist, stopping him from getting any more ink in the air. 6 succumbed, still looking petrified. "What's wrong with him? Is he okay?" 9 asked 5 worryingly, still staring at 6. "It's a vision." The mechanic rapidly replied softly, still rubbing 6's back. He turned to the group behind him and addressed him. Hurry, get him some paper." 8 lumbered off hurriedly. Around the corner, he came back with huge stacks of burned, crumpled paper in his arms. He laid them in front of 6 with a grunt. 5 took 6's hands and laid them on the paper. "Tell us, 6." 5 said to him softly, obviously been through this with him many times before. 6's hands immediately flew across the paper. He wasn't even looking down to do so. 9 knew that 6 could see something that the others could not, and was articulating what he saw in the only way he knew how. Each line 6 scratched on the paper soon connected and began to form a picture. Quite suddenly, 6 stopped shaking and ceased his relentless drawing. He blinked his pupils, returning to normal size. He stumbled slightly, heaving in a deep sigh and shaking his head, as if to clear it of a recent nightmare. He turned to look up at the others, who all stared down at him in bewilderment. 6 took the paper in his hands and got to his feet a bit shakily. 9 and 5 followed, watching him warily. 6 looked up at the two and gently handed the paper to 9, giving him a small shake. He took the paper to 6, studying the drawing closely. It was one of the talisman, but surrounding it, there was a strange shape. It almost looked like a tree. 9 furrowed his brows and looked closely at it, not understanding what it meant. "I don't understand," he told 6 quietly. The visionary blinked and helplessly tried to articulate its meaning so it would make sense to his fellows who could not see. "In the honor room. The box within the honor room," he said, pointing in the tree-like shape, looking up at 9 desperately. "The honor room? What do you mean?" 9 asked impatiently. "The honor room you will find there," 6 said, looking up at 9 with wide, intelligent eyes. He reached forward and gently touched 9's chest. "Find what, 6?" he asked him softly. "The answer. The answer to the dark one you shall find there," 6 replied, nodding as if he knew that 9 understood him. 5 walked up to stand beside 9, staring at the paper he held in his hands. He pointed to the tree. He's never drawn this before. I wonder what it means," 5 asked softly. 6 looked up at him, holding out his hand. "The honor room. The answer you shall find there," he told him desperately, as if his life depended on it. He took 9's hand and held him tightly, trying to make him understand, but the younger ragdoll did. "Honor room. What does that mean? What does that mean?" 7 asked, 9 looking up. 7, was there anything in the place where we found the answers?" 9 asked, searching through his memory. "A box or something important to the scientist?" He remembered walking through many shelves hiding within the shattered globe filled with trophies and awards. 7 seemed to try to retrace her steps. "I don't know, but I do think that's what 6 means by honor room. The scientist had stacks of awards in that room. We should look."
What? We are rapidly running out of time, and you want us to run off to some folly while the machines are rising again? 6 is not even sane. He never has been. All he done is spout idiotic nonsense that helps no one. We are not going to follow this absurdity.
One yelled, thumping his staff against the ground in exasperation. 6 cringed and seemed to shrink, taking a few steps backwards even though one stood a few feet away. He looked as if the older Stitch Punk had just slapped him across the face. 9 stared at him, taking in his heartbreaking expression. He could feel the anger and rage inside of him like some sort of storm. He knew that 6 couldn't help his visions, what he saw of the world around him, yet it was apparent one was insistent on treating him like some sort of freak, as if he had held no feelings whatsoever. Walking over to 6, 9 gently placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling a pang as he flinched away from him. "We must go back to the honor room," 9 asked 6 quietly. 6 nodded slightly, still staring at 1.
"No!"
1 snarled, his fist tightened on his staff. 9 turned to face 1, struggling to keep his temper in check. 1, this may be our only hope to finding out how to defeat the machine beast and destroying all of the machines, the young Stitch Punk said firmly. It's a chance we have to take.
May I remind you the last time you decided to take a chance?
1 said, severely pointing at 2, who blinked. It's either we take a risk and have a chance, or not at all. It's either we take a risk and have a chance, or not at all, 7 growled, stepping between 1 and 9. I am not letting you lock us up again. You're treating 9 like he's an enemy here, when he is more than willing to risk his life to help us all. You ungrateful. He gives you a second chance at life, and the whole time you know him, you don't trust him, 7 said, her brow furrowed threateningly.
It wasn't any of us who woke the machine in the first place, girl,
1 answered, making a vague gesture to the group behind him. 9 blinked, his heart falling slightly as he realized 1 still counted him as an outsider. He did not know. Yes, he made a mistake, but ever since he woke, he's been doing nothing but trying to help us, she replied. They both fiercely stared at one another, trying to get 1 to back down. 9, however, had a hand on 7's shoulder, gently pulling her to the side. 7, he's right. I did make a mistake, he said, a gentle voice pulling her to the side, besides him standing in front. But 1, we need to focus on defeating our real enemy, instead of fighting amongst ourselves. We need to go back to the honor room. We need to find answers, he said. 1 narrowed his eyes and looked at each face of his clan staring at him.
Fine. We shall go back to this honor room and try to find this box. But I swear if you lead us to any more danger,
1 said, lifting a finger at 9. The younger ignored the threat, but gave 1 a nod. He turned away to the group and began to walk out of the library. He suddenly felt someone grasp his shoulder and turned to see 6 peering up at him. His eyes were wide, searching his face the same way he had done when he emerged from the talisman. You're the one to save us. The one to save us, 6 said softly. 9 blinked, staring down in the bundled, banded Stitch Punk. 6 then gave him a small smile and withdrew, scurrying away to follow closely behind 5. 9 looked after him, his words rolling around his mind. He then shook his head and began to walk after the others. They didn't know a seeker coming back to the fabrication machine with the body of the cat beast. End of chapter 14.